Hi, this is J. Sai Deepak. I'm a practitioner of intellectual property law before the Delhi High Court. I am currently a senior associate with Sai Krishnan Associates. I've been working with this firm for the last 5 years. The module that I'll be handling is the module on patent infringement. This is more or less a crisp module which focuses more on aspects of patent litigation as opposed to patent jurisprudence, which is why the assumption is the readers of this particular module are fairly at home with patent jurisprudence. The content of this particular module relies on references to provisions from the statute and its interpretation, and case laws have been used only to the extent that they are relevant for the purposes of understanding the provisions that have been dealt with. When we speak of patent rights, the first thing that needs to be understood is what is the scope of the rights granted by the Patents Act to a patentee, and this is dealt with by section 48 of the Patents Act. Section 48 of the Patents Act, as most people already are aware of, grants exclusionary rights which are negative in nature, which means the patentee has the right to exclude all third parties from acts of making, selling, offering to sell, importing, so on and so forth, which do not have his consent. In stark contrast to the standard notion of property, this is not a positive right which is meant to bestow upon the patentee the right to practice something. It is the right to exclude third parties. This is the nature of rights under section 48. Now, as far as section 48 is concerned, it comes with its own set of limitations, and these limitations are more or less conditions contingent to which the right under section 48 can be enjoyed. For instance, section 47 prescribes that the government need not take the permission of a patentee in importing products, importing the patented products and using it as part of its dispensaries, as part of its hospitals, if the patented product is a pharmaceutical product. Nor does it need the permission of the patentee to store or sell the patented product through notified dispensaries as well. There are a host of conditions under section 47, including the conditions for research. Now, these conditions not only act as limitations on the right of a patentee under section 48, these also act as prospective defenses if a third party is sued by the patentee for infringement. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the Patents Act 1970 is that although it grants a right, it expressly disclaims any presumptive validity owing to the mere factum of grant. Simply put, just because somebody has got a patent, there is no presumption that the patent has been validly granted. Therefore, it is perpetually open to attacks, it's perpetually open to challenges, it's perpetually vulnerable to challenge by any party by way of a pre-grant, by way of a post-grant opposition or revocation subsequent to the grant. Now, section 13(4) has also been interpreted by the Supreme Court in the decision of Vishwanath Prasad Radheshyam versus Hindustan Metals, where the Supreme Court has interpreted section 13(4) to mean that despite the fact that a patent may have undergone rigorous examination during the course of its prosecution by the Indian Patent Office, it does not translate to any form of validity, which means the evidentiary burden is on the patentee whenever he seeks to assert the patent in a court of law. So, for instance, if the patentee were to institute a suit for infringement, the first step that he has to cross, or the first barrier that he has to cross, is to prove prima facie that the patent that has been granted to him is valid in the first place. Unless and until this aspect of the patent is covered, it is practically impossible and legally impermissible for the patentee to proceed to the second aspect of his case, which is prima facie case of infringement. Now, this is in stark contrast to, let's say, other forms of intellectual property such as the Trademarks Act, where under the Trademarks Act section 31 clearly states that a trademark that is registered shall be treated as prima facie valid, which means it is the defendant's burden to disprove or to challenge the validity of the trademark that has been granted. Now, this has serious implications in terms of enforcement for a patentee, because even if the patent may have been granted 4 or 5 years after its prosecution and examination of a by the Patent Office, it does not in any way hand him the ability to claim prima facie validity or presumptive validity. Although courts have developed certain principles in case laws where they have come out with propositions to the effect that if the patent has been in force for about 6 to 7 years at least a considerable period of time, or if the patented invention has been practiced by members of the industry for a significant amount of time, or the patented invention has been licensed to a significant number of people by the patentees, the court may venture to treat the patent as having proven its validity over a point of time. Be that as it may, the question remains whether courts are allowed to build such safeguards or checks or balances which appear to be extra statutory when there is an express provision such as section 13(4) which disclaims presumptive validity and which does not seem to leave any windows open, or which does not seem to provide for these kind of contingent recognitions of validity or conditional recognitions of validity. Now, this is something that an Indian court has not had an opportunity to address so far, but it's hoped that at some point these will be addressed. So, once we have a right, the question is what are the metes and bounds of the right positively and negatively. When I say positive metes and bounds, I refer to limitations on the patentee which keep open the realm of commons for all third parties. And when I speak of negative bounds of or negative conditions, I refer to those instances where a third party has crossed the threshold of the realm of commons and has entered the territory of infringement. Unlike the Copyright Act, which specifically enumerates those actions which would amount to infringement or which would constitute infringement, the Patents Act does not have a single provision that spells out what would amount to infringement of the patentee's right under section 48. Therefore, one can assume, and this would be a logical and legal interpretation or a legal conclusion to arrive at, that anything which amounts to the exclusive right of the patentee under section 48, and if such an activity is undertaken by a third party without the consent of the patentee, it would amount to infringement of the patentee's rights under section 48.